Welcome to the Inside Southwest Florida Football Podcast.
Let's go.
Presented by the News Press and Naples Daily News.
1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to the Inside Southwest Florida Football Podcast. I am Dustin Levy and we have survived week one and the stormy weather that came with it. Let me introduce my co-hosts. First, the diligent Dan DeLuca. Dan, how are you doing and have you recovered from your game?
Yes, first game in 7 years, and just like I left off, big, huge weather delay. 2 hours right in the middle of the game. Finished up a little after midnight, but really good game. So I wouldn't say it was worth the extra 2-hour delay, but at least it was a good game.
Of course, we have the astute Alex Martin. Alex, how are you doing, and how well equipped are you for all of your fantasy drafts?
Doing good. Had one last week, actually. Thought I had a pretty solid team that was drafted. Posted that to Twitter and everything. But, survived. No rain, no lightning down in Collier County. Was able to see four quarters of football with no delay, which was great. I don't think you can say the same, though, right?
No, I'm coming off a delayed game last night. I was out at South for not even the conclusion because their game ended after 3 quarters between South and Gulf Coast with the Sharks coming out on top. But yeah, Friday night, me and our award-winning producer, Amanda Inscore, were trapped in the press box as the storm raged right on top of us. It was a crazy, crazy night, but I'm glad that we have some games to talk about. Not all of our games were completed. Some of them are going to be held in October. Let's get into it. For you guys, what were some of your main takeaways from all the outcomes this week?
Let's start with my game. Naples, on paper, in the final score, beats Lehigh 45-9. I talked about it Friday night in Twitter Spaces. We'll be doing that again this Friday. It was a tale of two different halves, really. First half, Lehigh was, I'd say, hanging around. Despite it being 21-3, they kind of had some self-inflicted wounds early on. They, were down 14-0 in the first 4.5 minutes. From there, they were always, playing catch-up. At times in the first half, they were playing really stout defense, shutting down Naples at times. And then you couldn't say that in the second half. Golden Eagles made necessary adjustments. They held Richard Young to 75 yards rushing and 40-some-odd yards receiving. Still had over 100 all-purpose yards against the Golden Eagle defense, which is very hard to do in and of itself. They kind of limited his touches. Lehigh as a team did have 265 yards of total offense, though, which – I'd say it's one of the silver linings from that loss, being able to move the ball against Naples. So that one was, kind of some, key takeaways for me.
What did you see from the quarterback situation over at Naples?
I saw a more clearer picture, actually. Nico Boyce seemed to have, with his opportunities and reps, gave that offense life. Unfortunately, you can't really say the same about Jack Melton. When he's in the game, you kind of know what's going to happen, and that is giving the ball to one of their 3 running backs in the backfield, or 2, depending on formation. With Nico Boyce in there, he flashed some really impressive speed for a sophomore. The kid is quick. He kind of showed some shades of Stanley Bryant, essentially being a 4th running back in that formation. I wouldn't be surprised, if we're talking next week, if, he's going to be the everyday starter for the Golden Eagles.
And it sounded like the North Fort Myers rivalry lived up to the hype. Dan, what time did that one wrap up?
It was a little after midnight. The most recent North Fort Myers battles, there was a lot of weird stuff that happened. Really good, really tight, close game. Defensive battle, which I'm not sure a lot of people expected, especially with all the offensive talent on both the teams, but Fort Myers wins in overtime, 16-10. Red Knights did not score an offensive touchdown in regulation. Fort Myers had a punt return called back by a questionable penalty. They had missed 2 field goals because of bad snaps, one of which North returned 85 yards for a touchdown, and their only touchdown in regulation. At the end of the game, Bo Somerset looked like he had broken through, looked like he was going to score, had the ball punched by Madrid Tucker. It kind of kicked off Bo's leg, went through the end zone for a touchback. That's what kind of set it into overtime. Fort Myers had the ball first in overtime, could not score. First play of overtime, Bo Somerset goes around the end for 10 yards and the touchdown. So it was nice to see, because he had the miscue at the end of the game, that he was able to come back, score in overtime. His coach liked it too. This is what Dwayne Mack had to say about Bo Somerset after the game.
Bo's a special player. He's a special player. He can run, he can throw, he can do it all, man. And for you guys to put him number 14, the top 15, with some other guys you have and we already knocked off, hey, that's the chip that we have. We talk about it every day.
All right, that was fun to hear from Coach Mack. Let's get into some of these other games. One that stood out to me was Dunbar 23, Charlotte 3. That result was way more lopsided than I expected. Anthony Benjamin with 11 receptions for 139 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think Benjamin is one of the most underrated players in the area. Just the ability to just completely break a game wide open with his speed at wide receiver.
His Twitter handle's right on. Can't be too quick, right? Definitely too fast for the Charlotte defense. Already in double-digit receptions in the first game. Kind of cool to see he's on pace for 100. That'd be a fun storyline to follow if he can somehow keep that clip up, which is definitely possible. I think him and probably 2 or 3 other receivers would have a chance of getting to 100 receptions. We saw this last year with them. You know, in the past game, he was the spark of that offense when they were throwing the ball. They would probably want to balance it out a little bit this year now that Twaski Abrams is in year 3. You know, if they need a big play, you know, you give the ball to 7 and you know, you let him do his thing.
Absolutely. Dan, was there another result that might have stood out to you?
How about Bishop Barreau 57, Port Charlotte 49? I mean, you're talking about a game with almost 1,200 total yards of offense. Carter Smith picks up where he left off last year, 299 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, rushes for 85 yards, and another 3 scores. One plus really for Varro in this game was they struggled with the running game last year, really didn't have a running back kind of step up. Richie Rode in the preseason talked about a couple of freshmen that he thought could kind of come through for them, and one of them, Deshaun Jenkins, goes for 105 yards, 1 touchdown last week, so that's a good sign for Bishop Varro. That's the most points they've scored in a game since 2019 when they hung 73 on LaBelle and then 58 on Cardinal Mooney. Those were some bad teams. They both went 2-8 that year. Port Charlotte, we think, is a pretty good team. So to put 57 points on that defense, I think that's really saying something for the Vikings. Of course, you don't want to allow 600 yards every week. You know, you're not going to win a lot of games that way. So that's obviously something they've got to fix. But really good showing for them on the road.
In 2 games this year, if you want to count the preseason, they put up 124 total points. Things are clicking over there right now, and it'll be interesting to see if it can continue against a much stingier, tougher defense this week.
Another close game was Community School walking it off against Immokalee with Decker Crosby throwing the game-winning 13-yard touchdown to Grayson Kersher. That was a good one. Alex, any other games that caught your eye?
Well, I think Barron Collier beating IMG Blue, putting a beat down on them, 37 points. And this is a game that was called at halftime. The Cougars hang 5 touchdowns, I think, in the first half. Tommy Moonkoch completed 10 passes for 123 yards. Running back goes for 180 yards on 7 carries. I thought that was pretty impressive. Maybe Barron Collier didn't take as big of a step back as we thought. We should have a better indicator of that this week when they take on a local opponent in Palmetto Ridge, who surprisingly scored their first win in the Paul Giovine era. Props to them, and I know those kids have gone through a lot over the past year. A huge road win down in the Keys for Giovine, the Bears and company. I don't think really any of us would have expected them to start 1-0 against that team, which actually has seems a Power 5 lineman. That might make this week's matchup against Barron a little more interesting.
And that's a perfect transition because I just wanted to shout out all the first-year head coaches who got wins. ECS with Mac Mitchell shutting out St. Stephen's on the road, and also Riverdale winning a close one at the start of the Frank Hepler area, 25-22 over Lely. Just wanted to touch on the games that got postponed to later in the season. Gateway Charter Oasis, Mariner East Lee, and Ida Baker Cape Coral. And after this break, we're going to look ahead.
Let's go.
Keep up with the action every week by following our live Friday night scoreboard at naplesnews.com, news-press.com, and by downloading the Naples Daily News and News Press apps onto your mobile devices.
And welcome back. We have a very special matchup coming this week in Fort Myers hosting St. Thomas Aquinas. We have some really great content coming out this week. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about what you have coming on the history of this rivalry?
Sure, yeah. I'm really kind of highlighting, the two teams. Obviously their 1992 matchup is one that a lot of people locally would remember because of the fact that both teams were ranked inside the USA Today top 10 at the time, which is a pretty big deal. It was a state semifinal that year. Aquinas ended up winning 28-0. And I'm really kind of doing a bigger picture story on where it began, where the two programs are now, and how they've kind of went in different directions in terms of success and whatnot. Aquinas has obviously turned into a national powerhouse since that first championship for them in 1992. This new generation kind of taking part in it. None of them were born the last time the two faced in 2001. That happened to be Sam Sirianni Sr.'s last game as coach. Definitely going to try and provide some perspective for the elders in this area and also maybe the younger ones who didn't really have a chance to experience this in the 2000s. Obviously, a lot of contested matchups, 4 years in a row from 98 to 01. Those were some pretty heated matchups, as were 1991 and 92. Aquinas' AD Twan Russell was on that 91 team, as was head coach Roger Harriet, who was a freshman that year. So he kind of had an experience as a freshman and sophomore playing Fort Myers and really seeing the program build to what it is now. Harriet's got, I believe, 5 crowns in 8 years as head coach. So had a chance to talk to Roger Harriet and Sam Sirianni Jr. and Don Weekly and some of those other guys to kind of really provide the perspective on this rivalry.
And Dan, I know you're diving a little deeper into that 92 team. Anything interesting that you're learning?
Well, I came back just in time because 10 years ago, I wrote a story about the 20th anniversary of the 92 team, and now I'm writing a story about the 30th anniversary of the 92 team. And when you talk about the 92 team, it isn't really just one team. It's sort of a culmination of 3 years. In 90, those seniors on the 92 team were sophomores. They lost one game to Charlotte, and that kept them out of the playoffs. So they did not make the playoffs in 1990. You're talking about an era where only district champions made the playoffs. There was no runner-up qualifications for the playoffs, no wild cards, none of that stuff. 91, make it to the state semifinals, lose to Aquinas, 17-0 at Edison Stadium. Really hard-fought defensive game. Kind of got away from Fort Myers in the second half. So going into the 92 season, they were really looking at that as, this is our chance to do something nobody's ever done before or since, which is bring a state football championship home to Lee County. Just really rolled through the regular season. A very explosive team, a lot of personality. This is the era of the Miami Hurricanes, kind of styled themselves after that, and had really a player whose high school exploits have not really been matched since then. Really for all the attention that Noel Devine got sort of in the beginning of that social media stage, Jamie German, for him to get the attention that he got in 1992 prior to, all of the attention that people get today as far as social media, is really pretty special. You're talking about USA Today, National Defensive Player of the Year, the first Florida Mr. Football. He won that as well, a parade All-American, MVP of the Florida-Georgia All-Star Game. Just an amazing season. But like a lot of those special seasons, it ends at the hands again of St. Thomas Aquinas. They lose 28-0 in Fort Lauderdale, ending that season and really sort of kickstarting that whole idea of a curse that Fort Myers has when they go up against Aquinas. It is a rivalry, but it is a one-sided rivalry.
A lot to look forward to in that one on Friday night, and a lot of really nice matchups this week. Alex, what's one that has your attention?
We got to kind of lean towards our game of the week, right? Dunbar taking on North Fort Myers. A really, really good matchup last year. 7-3. Dunbar wins. North probably should have won that game if it weren't for 2 missed field goals. North had a a really solid game plan against Dunbar wasn't meant to be. This year is definitely there's a possibility that changes. There might be a little bit of bad blood in this game. Adrian Stone and Tavares Irons are on the other side now. We'll see how chippy and how physical this one gets early on, but I would be shocked if this is a one-sided game.
I don't think that we can forget that Dunbar hasn't lost a game in the regular season for 2 years now. They are still looking to assert themselves as a top dog, and North, things have been trending in the right direction for them. Are they ready for this? Because if they pull off this win, maybe they're top dog. It's in Lee County. So that's going to be one that I'm really looking forward to. Dan, what about you? What game are you excited about?
Well, none of us are going to see this game because it's on the road, but I think Naples at Venice is a really good way to take the temperature kind of both these teams at this point. Naples, took care of business against Lehigh last week, really pulled away in the second half. Venice ended up losing, but they lost to Miami Northwestern. I mean, there's no shame in that. Defending 8A champions, we kind of get the sense that, Naples has a chance to make a run, get to a state championship game this year. If they can go up to Venice and really have a good showing, even if they don't win that game, if they're in that game in the fourth quarter, if they can keep it a one-score game, I think it really, can kind of help springboard them and give them that confidence that they need, when they get into the playoffs, get into a tough battle, that they can look back at this game and their performance up at Venice if they can stay with them.
And one thing to point out is that Venice had 2 touchdowns called back due to penalties. A very young team for John Peacock standards. Definitely some youth there, some inexperience after losing a lot last year. Venice does have a 5-star defensive lineman in Damon Wilson, who is, Naples is going to have to game plan around or game plan for him. So definitely going to be a nice little clash between 2 different styles for sure up at Powell Davis Friday.
And they won't be the only team with a big challenge on the road. Alex, what can you tell me about First Baptist?
Well, they're playing a team that has won their last 30 games. Chardon, Ohio is Cleveland suburbs, closer to, I believe, Canton and, Akron area, kind of. One of those teams that you don't really know a lot about. They've won 2 straight state championships up in Ohio. This is another trip up north for First Baptist. They went to Andover, Massachusetts last year and won quite handily. I think this game is going to be a whole lot more competitive than last year. Chardon just played Camden, New Jersey, who had 7 Division I prospects. Chardon has just 2, and they put looks like a pretty sizable beat down on them, 36-6. So, definitely one to watch, I think. This game will not be Friday night. It'll be 3:30 Saturday. I'd be interested to see how the Lions fare. If they can come away with a winner, as Dan kind of alluded to in his pick for one of his top games, if they can have some sort of a good showing here, I think that'll be really encouraging for their prospects in 1S.
Another fun one, I think, is going to be Lehigh at Bishop Verot, just to kind of another one that's going to take the temperature of both of these teams. Can Lehigh rebound from their Naples loss? Bishop Verot, for all they've done offensively to start the season, can their defense handle Richard Young? That's going to be a really exciting one. Any other thoughts? What do you think about that matchup?
Well, also, can Verot handle the pressure of being 1 win away from 300? Does that get to any of the kids' heads? Does that add a little pressure coming into this week? I imagine Richie Road and company will try and downplay that and try to avoid making that a distraction because they've got a 5-star running back to worry about who is primed to, I think, have a really impressive bounce back game here. Last time Richie Road faced Richard Young, it was 9 carries for negative 11 yards and 2 fumbles. This is 2020 at Cypress Lake. Lightning ended up winning that one. Richie took away the run game. So, we'll see. Lehigh is definitely thirsty for a bounce back win. They're hungry for it. Will they get it here on the road? Definitely one to watch. But unfortunately, Greg Coleman will not be at this game. He'll be up at West Virginia. Somebody could call it the Greg Coleman game because he was AD at Lehigh last year. Now he's AD at Verot. He'll be enjoying some Mountaineer football up in West Virginia.
And we'll be making some concrete predictions on these games after the break. So when we return, we will share our picks for Week 2 games.
for more in-depth analysis of high school football in Lee and Collier County each week. Go to NaplesNews.com and news-press.com.
Let's just do it, okay?
Follow us on Instagram at News Press Sports and NDN Prep Zone.
Let we go!
And welcome back. It is your favorite segment of the podcast. It is picks time. We had a pretty good time last week, or at least I did. I went 7-2, while my colleagues over here both went 5-4. We did pick 10 games, so obviously you guys saw that added up to 9. That Ida Baker Cape Coral game did not get completed. When that does, it will roll over into that week's picks, so we will not be picking that game again, obviously. We will just pick it up when that game takes place. Pretty loaded slate this week. I think everybody kind of knew that going in. A lot of competitive contests. And they start on Thursday night, guys. SFCA Canterbury is one to watch. East Lee County Estero is also Thursday. You got about 4 games Thursday night, so it should be exciting. But we're only picking one of them. SFCA Canterbury, a good little private 8 battle here. Dan, can Canterbury impress in a 49-0 win over Marco Island? SFCA trying to get in the win column. Can they do that?
I think so. The difference will be SFCA's offense in that passing game. It's a big rivalry. I mean, these schools, really like to get after each other, but I think the difference is going to be that passing game.
Yeah, I'm going to agree and go with SFCA. I think Shaden Condor caught 11 passes for nearly 200 yards last week. One of those performances we highlighted in our Game Balls article. That's going to be my pick.
Shaden Condor probably going to have a field day here, I think. If he doesn't, that'll be attributed to the Canterbury defense kind of game planning around him. But I think he's in line for another big one here. Eli Moore and them are primed to bounce back after a pretty tough loss to Santa Fe. I'm going to take SFCA as well, so unison across the board there. Next up, kind of an interesting matchup, but I think there is a favorite here. Lely going to Gulf Coast. I think a lot of us didn't expect Lely to be in it for 4 quarters against Riverdale, with them having 2 Division I prospects. Gulf Coast will be playing this game on shorter rest. Dustin, do you think that impacts them here at all? Maybe a sluggish start?
I'm not sure about that. I'm going to take the Sharks here. I just really liked Todd Nichols' game plan coming into last night. They didn't ask Connor Bear to do too much. They kind of kept it on the ground. I think they're going to be ready for this one, and they're going to be 2-0.
Dan, definitely one of the weirder games, I'd say. Any shot of a Lely upset at all?
I think there's a shot. I think they really did some good things last week against Riverdale. Obviously have a very good back, that's able to kind of control the game at times. I just think they're still trying to, develop that well-balanced offense. Passing game, is really not there yet. And I think that gives Gulf Coast an advantage. They will be on a little bit of short rest. If they overlook the Trojans, they can get upset here, but I don't see that happening. I think Gulf Coast wins this.
Kind of picking up on Dan's point about seeing Gershom Guerrier at Lely. This will be the 3rd team that's pretty much run the ball for positive yardage in terms of big gains and whatnot. They'll be facing a team that likes running the ball, so that'll be the matchup. I think winning the line of scrimmage is key here. Gulf Coast did a pretty solid job of that against Naples for the most part. Sounds like they did a really good job of that between Friday and Monday against South. I'd expect to see more of the same here. I don't think the Sharks get enough credit. I think they're a 7-win team this year. I think they get win number 2 this Friday. Next up, Golden Gate going to Immokalee. Nick Bajika's squad is looking to go 2-0 in back-to-back seasons. James Delgado is still looking for win number 1. Dustin, does last week's loss kind of hang with Immokalee here, or how do you think they approach this one?
I think Golden Gate might be too big a challenge. especially last week, Brian Bachman going 15 of 21 for 227 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. That's an eye-opening performance for me at least. So I'm going to pick the Titans here.
I'm also with the Titans. I think it's just too much in terms of CSN's offense is, not as great as Golden Gate's in my opinion, but it is still an offense that can win games. Defending John Leon is going to be tough for them. Brian Bachman as well. Titans just have a lot of pieces. They put together a really solid program this year, I think. And I'm also going to take the Titans, Dan.
I think we have our first disagreement. I think Immokalee has kind of shown that this isn't really going to be maybe as extensive a rebuild as some people might have thought. They beat Gladesday in the preseason. We say, oh, that's a preseason game. That's a pretty good program that they beat, and I think that surprised a lot of people. And then last week really took Community School down to the wire, and Community School has been a very solid team, very consistent program over the last few years. They're at home. They're getting Golden Gate, which, as you guys mentioned, kind of a team that people are eyeing for, maybe a little bit of a breakthrough season. But I think the Indians get them. I think that I like what I see so far out of them. James Delgado, kind of has that program on the upswing, I think, a little bit. And I think they're going to exceed what people thought they would finish, how they would finish this year. And to do that, they're going to have to win some games that people don't expect them to win, and I think they get the win this week.
This game is at Gary Bates Stadium, for the record. Definitely one of those where anything can happen. Golden Gate could fall flat. Immokalee could over-impress here. We shall get the answer on that Friday night with Nick Wilson there on behalf of us. Next up, Tampa Catholic coming down to Cypress Lake. They have not played a game yet this season. The Panthers have, albeit it was over a 2-day stretch, Friday, Monday. Panthers got a 35-20 win over Gateway. Eagles hung around in this one for quite a while. Dustin, you think Cypress can start 2-0 here in Joey Mendez's second year?
I think the turnaround might be a little bit too tough, and I know I said the opposite for Gulf Coast, but Gulf Coast is a very experienced team. I think Cypress Lake is a little bit younger, and Tampa Catholic is not easy. I think they went 7-4 last year. So yeah, I'm going to go with Tampa Catholic on that one.
I'm also taking TC. They just had a better strength of schedule last year. They've got a ton of pieces coming back, I think. And, those pieces will, I think, give Cypress Lake some problems. I'm going to take Tampa Catholic.
Yeah, same here. Tampa Catholic. Good job by Cypress, win their season opener, but playing kind of a different level this week against Tampa Catholic, and I think it's going to be a little too much for them.
In this matchup, I don't think any of us expected either side to potentially start 2-0, but it's going to happen. Palmetto Ridge going to Barron Collier this Friday. Somebody's got to come away undefeated. Dustin, which team is it?
This is a tough one. I think it would have been a lot easier if Palmetto Ridge didn't have that showing that they did in Key West. But I'm going to go with the Cougars here. Brian Daniels had a really nice game against IMG Blue, rushing for 2 touchdowns and 150 yards. I like a good running game, so I'm going to go with Barron Collier.
Look, this is one where I'd love to go against you because I think Palmetto Ridge has a pretty decent shot at this. But I just can't at this point. I'm still in wait-and-see mode with the Bears. This game will provide a much clearer picture, I think, of where they are because it's very hard to gauge against out-of-area teams that you haven't seen before. This was a pretty competitive game last year. The epic game where a Jaden Booker touchdown was called back because a ton of Palmetto Ridge players just ran onto the field. A lot of fireworks late in that game. That's what led to Chris Tokanen's suspension last year. But I'm going to take the Cougars at home. I think Mark Jackson's squad is fired up. They're gritty. They got a chip on their shoulder. Some things were said in the media. I think the Cougars are just the better team at this point in time. Dan?
Yeah, I think so. I think the game's probably a little closer than people would have expected, maybe entering the season. But I think Barron Collier, they're at home. I think that'll be the difference. I think it'll be close, but Barron Collier comes out on top.
So first 5 games are done. Next 5 games, I don't think there's going to be as much consensus here. I think there's going to be a lot maybe picking against each other. Starting with First Baptist and Chardon, the Lions, can they snap that 30-game win streak from the Hilltoppers?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm going to take Chardon here. I think that was why I asked in the last segment for you to tell me a little bit about them, but a 30-game winning streak, that's pretty nice.
Look, I think it's too much. Chardon committed, surprisingly, don't tell me how, no penalties in 48 minutes last week against Camden, New Jersey. It's going to come down to coaching. This is not going to be a game where someone's going to take over the game. This is going to be a game that's going to be won with the headsets. Billy Sparaccio and going up against a coach that's won 30 in a row. Definitely, I think, a tall order for First Baptist. The last time, I think one of us may have picked Andover last year by accident. I think this game is going to, provide a clearer picture. I am going to take Chardon as well. I'm unsure of how First Baptist can fare against that. I believe it's a pretty solid run offense that they have up there. Dan, are you going to go with the Lions at all, or?
No, tough to pick against back-to-back state championship team. For as good as First Baptist has been, and as solid and consistent a program as they've been, this is a really tall task for them. I don't think they can pull it off, but I think there's some good things that can come out of this either way. You get to measure yourself, against the team that's really dominated their competition the last couple of years, and really see where you are as a program.
Consensus across the board there. Next up, a team that's looking to get win number 300, Bishop Verot playing host to Lehigh. I am going to start here in this one. I'm not going to defer to Dustin. Bishop Verot's going to have to wait another week, I think. Lehigh is fired up. I saw the tone on that sideline last week. They wanted to get back to work, and they wanted to put that Naples game behind them, turn the page, move on, whatever. I think Lehigh is going to be making some big strides this week, and they're going to be playing a much more fast, athletic defense that could pose problems for the Verot offense. I think Carter Smith, I think, is going to have to do a little bit more in this one than he has in recent games to have a shot. But Lehigh is just the better all-around team. I'm going to take the Lightning.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it would be too reactive to look at those week one outcomes, especially based on Lehigh having to play Naples. Lehigh just has Richard Young on offense, Tyree Cunningham on defense. There's just more questions that I have about Bishop Verot in this one, so I'm going to take the Lightning.
Yeah, this is not the situation that I think Verot wanted for this game. I think they would have much rather that Lehigh had a very good showing against Naples last week and, didn't have that kind of chip and disappointment coming off that. And, Verot gave up almost 300 yards rushing last week to Port Charlotte. Port Charlotte has some good backs. They don't have Richard Young, and I think that's going to end up being the difference. Lehigh wins this one.
Definite X factor there for Richard. Next up, we can make this one fast. Aquinas-Fort Myers. Two teams have gone in vastly different directions since '92. I'm going to start Aquinas big here. This game was kind of scheduled more towards the fanfare and the pregame ceremonies and honoring this '92 team way back when. Aquinas just too much for Fort Myers, I think.
Yeah, I think Fort Myers is going to fall to 0-2, which is not something we've seen very often.
Picking up on that real fast. Last time it happened, 1981, 41 years since Fort Myers started a season 0-2. It seems pretty imminent that it's going to happen this year. Dan, are you going to disagree with either of us?
I think it's going to be a fun night. I mean, nobody celebrates the past and the history like Fort Myers does. I think it's going to be, a really classy ceremony. But I think the game is going to be pretty out of hand. I think Aquinas wins easily.
Next game, Naples going to Venice, guys. This is a very interesting game because Venice has had their reputation of making it to a Final Four, it seems like, every year. Can Naples pick one off here and start 2-0?
Too tough a task. I'm going to go with Venice on this one. But I think Naples is going to make it very competitive.
Am I going to pick against Naples 2 weeks in a row? I think I am. It's tough to go against the defending 8A champs. Even though they're young, they do have a lot of talent there. They lost last week to Northwestern, so I think they're going to be fired up to get back on the winning track, especially at home. I think Venice wins.
I was going to lean towards Venice here. I think I might still. I had Naples at 8-2 in my projected regular season with a loss to Venice here. I have no choice but to stick by that. I think, the Indians are just too good at home specifically. I think last week was somewhat of an aberration for them. I'm going to take Venice here as well. And then our game of the week. Somebody's going to 2-0 in this one. North Fort Myers taking on Dunbar. As of right now, we are aware this game's at Dunbar. It could switch to North depending on field conditions. Dustin, would home field play a role here, if this game were to get moved?
I'm not sure because, Fort Myers played North pretty close at North. But I'm going to take Dunbar here, and I'm going to take them because seeing North's offense struggle a little bit against Fort Myers, well, Dunbar was a whole different test. And, I know the Tigers lost a little bit, but I think they might feel like they have something to prove. So I'm going to go with Dunbar here.
I think North wins this one. Really impressed with North's defense, especially the defensive line. Adrian Stone just dominated that game against Fort Myers. I think he's going to be a nightmare for Dunbar to try to block. And listen, Fort Myers was really fired up for that game against North. Gave them the A-plus effort. North had every reason to lose that game, but they found a way to win. Even though they couldn't score an offensive touchdown in regulation, they got it done, and I think they'll get it done against Dunbar.
Flip a coin here, really. I mean, both sides have their respective arguments. Adrian Stone and Tavares Irons are on the other side. They're probably pretty amped up more than the other guys. Anthony Benjamin and that receiving core are looking to really do some big things. Landon Winterbottom as well. I think this just comes down to taking care of the football. Which team turns the ball over fewer times? It's just whoever I'm going to say here, and I'm going to pick Dunbar. I just think that out on the skill positions that they are just better. I don't think you could say the same really about North Fort Myers, especially with some of their guys playing both ways. Be curious to see if that takes a toll on them this time, because chances are they're not going to have a 2-hour rain delay or a 2-hour delay where they can actually rest up and recover and kind of play two different games, so to speak. So I'm going to take the Tigers here. Dustin and I are same across the board, so you can't build on my lead at all, which is great. But yeah, that'll wrap it up for the pick segment. You guys know where to go at this point for all the best content in Southwest Florida. You go to news-press.com/sports, naplesnews.com/sports. You can get this podcast at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we will be back covering games Thursday night. We know we'll be out Friday night, hopefully not Monday night, weather permitting. One constant, we'll be recording this podcast every Tuesday. It'll be out every Wednesday at noon. So we'll see you next week for Season 5, Episode 4.
Thanks for listening. Remember, the Inside Southwest Florida Football Podcast will be available for download every Wednesday at noon to get you ready for upcoming games.
1, 2, 3.